My name's Nikki, and this is Steve. We're both from the Nelson Library, and we're here for the New Zealand Book Awards for Children and Young Adults. And we have two finalists here with us. We set them a challenge. So we asked the illustrator if he could take the author's book and illustrate a part of her work. And then we got the author to take a piece of illustration from the other book and write a backstory to that. So we're going to find out how it went. So we're going to introduce Toby Morris, who wrote the Treaty of Waitangi, and Janet Hunt, who did the wonderful 3 Kiwi Tales. So welcome, Janet and Toby.
Kia ora.
Yeah, good to be here.
What would be good just before we started, if we could just hand the microphone over to you, and then if you could give us a little bit of introduction to each of your books and talk about like what inspired you to write or draw the particular book. When I had a look through them, they all look like really sort of deeply personal stories for each person. So I'd love to hear about the inspiration behind it. So we'll start with Janet. To be able to talk to us about 3 Kiwi Tales.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, 3 Kiwi Tales is a follow-up book to another one which was called How to Mend a Kia. It's this one here. Sorry, we would have promoted this one here, which I wrote a couple of years ago, and it's about Wild Base Hospital, which is the wildlife hospital at Massey University, and about all the different New Zealand wildlife, the precious wildlife that is, which is taken to Wild Base and which is often quite badly hurt, and it's about the whole thing about what they do. And so it's kind of a sciencey book in a way, because it's about the veterinary background, but it's also the stories of all the individual creatures that come into Wild Base. Then after I wrote that book, then I was asked if I would write another Wild Base book, and I was a little bit stumped to start with because I couldn't quite, I felt as though I'd done it, but then I started to think about Kiwi and how amazing Kiwi are and just how threatened they are. And there's nearly always a Kiwi at Wild Base in one of the cages, one or more Kiwi, because they're constantly hurting themselves one way or another. And so in consultation with the people at Wild Base, we worked out some particular characters, some Kiwi characters, and then we wrote the stories about those. So we start off with an egg, and the story of the egg and how it kind of developed, and that we had a particular egg that was in trouble. It's hard to imagine how an egg can be in trouble, but if you think about how a Kiwi is inside an egg, it's got a huge long bill and it's got those great big long legs, and they're all curled up inside an egg. And after it's nearly ready to hatch, it can't move because it's got that beak in the way, it's got the long legs all curled around. And so this particular little egg was in trouble. And it was all about how it was taken to Rainbow Springs and what they did to help the egg hatch. And then that little Kiwi still wasn't really right because it had a big egg yolk sac. The yolk sac feeds the Kiwi while it's still in the egg, and then a little while after it hatches. So it was then taken to it was taken from Rainbow Springs and sent down to Wild Base, and they operated on it. And so that was the first story, and it starts with the egg, and then we have another story about a Kiwi who breaks her bill. And of course, if you break your bill and you're a Kiwi, you're stuck because that's your mouth and it's your hands. And so she was taken to Wild Base from right at the bottom of the South Island. And then the last story was about a little Kiwi called Pee-wee who kept falling over and breaking his legs. And so 3 Kiwi Tales, and that's how it all came to be. And it was amazing writing about it and learning so much about Kiwi myself, because even though I thought I knew quite a lot, I certainly learned an awful lot more once I started working on this book. How's that?
Thank you. So I'll go over to Toby now. And so what inspired you to write or draw a comic around the Treaty of Waitangi?
Yeah, well, it was a project that started off as a school journal book originally, actually. And I was contacted by the people who do the school journal and asked if I would be interested in illustrating a sort of a comic version of the Treaty of Waitangi. And to be totally honest, my first sort of reaction to that was I thought it was too hard. I thought, how are we going to do this? It had to be, their idea was to do a comic about the treaty that is helping young readers understand the treaty. And my initial response was, I thought, like, it's really quite a complicated story. There's lots to it. You have to be really careful in doing your research really thoroughly, and I'm not necessarily an expert historian either. So yeah, my initial response was that I wasn't sure. It seemed pretty daunting, but they sort of talked me around. They had done 2 previous stories in the school journal about the treaty and gone through lots of the work and doing the research and figuring out what's the best way to explain that to a young audience. And our book was going to be a sort of an adaptation of that. So that sort of set me at ease about the history side of it, because I'm definitely not a history expert. And then my sort of second worry about it being too complicated or a bit scary, like, to be totally honest, sometimes it's a topic that can be a bit scary, and I didn't know a lot about it. And like Janet says that she learned a lot doing her book, I learned so much doing this book. I'm really glad that I did do it, because the more I read about it and the more I talked with the authors, the sort of the less scary it got. And what I really hope with the book is that works like that for kids too. Like, I think it's something that seems really complicated, but is really important that everybody knows about, and I think it's really cool if kids can learn about it too.
Awesome.
So just a follow-up question just for Toby.
Yeah.
So why a comic? Like, I mean, obviously you're a cartoonist, but like, what do you think? What do you think a comic detailing Treaty of Waitangi really brings differently than, say, a school journal article?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I know for myself, as I was a young reader, I loved comics. Like, as a kid, I always was sort of drawn to comics, and I feel like when I was a kid, the teachers would always tell me to sort of go and get a real book, or like, that's not proper reading. But there's been a big change in the last few years, I feel like, where teachers and schools are more open to the idea that comics can be quite useful for learning to read, especially for young readers. I also think there's something about the combination of images and words together that I'm always really interested in. I think it can be quite, you can explain a lot of stuff through the images that might be quite long to explain in words. I think it means you can explain a lot of stuff quite quickly, which I think is really good for young readers that are might be put off by a really complicated long piece of text. You can communicate a lot of that information through. And plus they're just fun, I think. I think kids love to pick them up and drawn to it. And when you're talking about a topic that people might be, seems like a pretty heavy topic, I think if you can present that in a fun way, that's really valuable too.
Cool. And sort of on the other side, like, we really should be holding up your books as much as possible. Janet, your book has got some really amazing photos of the Kiwis at the hospital. Now, what was it like getting all these photos? Did you take the photos, or I saw that some photos were from other people, but...
I took quite a lot. I always try and take quite a lot of photos because that's just one of the things I do as well. So I kind of see myself as a writer / graphic designer. So when I'm there, I'm always taking lots of photos. So yeah, just as Toby said, that the photographs are really complementary to the text so that they totally expand. You can show so much more of the reality of what's happening by having a photograph. And a lot of people I know just read the photographs rather than reading the text as well. So it's a sort of a joint thing. Sorry, did I answer that question? I'm not sure if I did, but anyway, yep, getting there. Yes, I take the photographs, take as many as I can, but I also complement them with other people's as needed. Yep.
So what's it like getting that close to the Kiwis? I've never been really that close to one. I've seen one running around behind glass, and are they amazing?
Yeah, they are amazing, and they're so. There's a spread there which is about the not bird, which is because it's explaining just how extraordinarily unique the Kiwi is and how much like a mammal it is. In fact, it's got whiskers like a cat. Its nostrils in the end of its bill. It hasn't got proper feathers. It's got fur, all that kind of thing. It's furry feathers. So it's it is pretty amazing. I didn't get to handle a lot. I did handle one. In fact, they gave me one and they got me to crop tube it when you put the tube down the throat and you put Then they feed it down the throat, and that was pretty scary because I felt like I might get it wrong, but they were watching very closely. So, but mostly I just was hanging around watching over people's shoulders. I wasn't touching them very much. I went to a Kiwi release just recently, and that was pretty awesome too. But they're quite feisty. They're very big, feisty birds, and they can be very frightened. So, people handle them as little as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a librarian, obviously, we're going to wonder about the books you liked as a kid and maybe how they influenced your style. Maybe start with Toby.
Sure. Like I already sort of said, I loved comics as a kid, and the big ones that I was really into were Tintin and Asterix books, which I think is still pretty popular. Tintin had a big influence on my style. I think lots of people see my drawing and can see that I have grown up reading Tintin books. The other one that I really love, which was really the only sort of Kiwi comic that was around in those days when I was a kid, was the Tiriti series. I really, really enjoyed those. That's, and I met the author of those recently, and he told me that their sort of idea for those was Tintin, but, sort of New Zealand version of Tintin, which makes sense why I enjoyed it so much.
Oh, that's awesome. They're still really popular at the library too.
We've got to ask though, like there are Tintin people and there are Asterix people. Like we think that some people, that you like one more than the other. Are you a Tintin guy?
I think so. I really enjoyed both of them, and they both got good things about them. But Tintin was the one that really resonated with me. I think that's just, you can sort of see the world through reading Tintin books. I think
totally, yeah. And Janet, what about you?
I have to say, I was also a big comic reader myself, and I'm an Asterix person, but Tintin just didn't totally resonate. But I was just going to show you this little book here, The Story of Dr Doolittle, partly because as a kid I read everything I could get my hands on, but this one was really important because when I was about 11, we had a teacher who was a reliever for one term, and he used to read to us from Dr Doolittle every day, and that was just amazing because I was an animal lover, and I had millions of pets, and one of the things I would most have liked to happen would be that I could talk to my animals or they could talk to me. So that was one of the ones that was really important to me as a kid.
Cool. So one of the other, you're obviously quite motivated, busy people. How do you structure your day? Like, where do you work? Do you listen to music? Janet, do you want to start that one?
Okay, well, I work in here. This is my office. There's books all around me on either side. If I have a book on the go, then I'm here every moment I can be. So I'm sort of structured, but when I'm not working on a book, I'm not in here very much. But when I've got a book on, then I just come in here as much as I can, and I get really stuck in. And so this is a little room which is separate from my house. I might get up. I always go for a walk in the mornings, or sometimes I go to the gym, but mostly I just go for a walk in the mornings, especially since lockdown. And then I will come in here and I'll get started. I'll research, read, think, write when it's necessary. So that's really my day. Like I say, I'm in here as much as I can be until the project's finished, and then I'm sort of somewhere else.
What about you, Toby?
Yeah, I work in all sorts of different things. Sometimes I do a bit of work for a website called The Spin-Off, and so I work out of their office sometimes during the day. But I also have a little desk here at home. I've got similar to Janet, in the garage. We've sort of converted it to a little drawing studio in there. And in the evenings, often I will set up out there and work on books and whatever else I'm drawing. Really, I just draw all the time. Like, I just was like that kid that just always drew at school, and I just never really stopped. I had a few days off recently, but I still find even when I have days off, I'm always doodling on a scrap of paper or sort of, pottering with sort of half ideas. I just like to draw as much as I can, really. I just it's always a bit of a happy place for me. And I do listen to music sometimes, especially if I've when I'm coming up with ideas. Sometimes I like to be a bit quieter. But when I'm sort of into the stage of really just knuckling down and working on stuff. I often like to have podcasts on or music on in the background, and yeah, hours can go by. It's can be quite a fun state to get into, I think.
Do you draw on paper or do you use a tablet?
A bit of a mix, but mostly these days on a tablet. Yeah, it's just a bit more practical. You can hit undo on a drawing these days is nice, and also pack up what you're doing. If I can set up on the kitchen table or go into my office or be out in the garage drawing, it's nice to be able to just have everything on file. But when kids always ask me about learning to draw, I think it's good to learn on pen and paper. It's basically the same thing. Like I approach drawing on a tablet in the same way as drawing on pen and paper, and I think for kids it's the best thing to do is just to draw and draw. Like kids that are into drawing and ask me about tips on how to get better, I think drawing on pen and paper is the fundamental skill that's good to work on, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we better bring up the challenge as well. How did you find the challenge, swapping the illustrator and the author's work over? Who wants to start with that one? Janet?
Well, it was quite a challenge because, yeah, I wasn't quite sure how it was going to go. I selected an image of the Henry Williams and his son sitting, writing, working on the treaty on the night of that they translated the treaty, because I thought that was a pretty crucial moment, among other things. And so that was my starting point. But I confess that I did do a little bit of extra reading because I wanted some extra background knowledge. So, and then I started to write it, and I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I always write by hand to begin with, and I had some ideas jotted down. Then over 2 or 3 days, and especially overnight is really good. If you sleep on things, suddenly other ideas occur to you by the morning. It started to just take shape, and by the time I was finished, I was really quite kind of drawn in because I'd written a little short story, which was not quite how I'd seen that it was going to come out.
Yeah.
So it was quite fun.
How about you, Toby?
It was fun. I really enjoyed it, actually. I loved reading the Kiwi stories, and there's elements of all of them that sort of leapt out at me. Like Janet said, the photography is great in the book and really evocative, and you sort of get a sense of the drama in each of the stories and the challenges in each. Each one is it's almost like a puzzle that the wild-based people were trying to solve. And I would have loved to have drawn all of them. I think you could have drawn things from all of them. But the one that I was really fascinated by was the middle story about, is it Rarotoka, whose bill is injured, and they rig up a really interesting sort of contraption of how they're going to keep the bill healing up properly. I was really fascinated by that story, and it was quite interesting to try and draw that. And I tried to give a bit of personality to the Kiwi, but really just show this interesting build contraption too. It was really fun to work on.
Oh, brilliant.
So now we'd like to invite Janet to read the story that she wrote that was illustrated from Toby's book, The Treaty of Waitangi here. So take it away, Janet.
Okay, it's called The Long Night. Edward Williams' eyes drooped and his head nodded. He couldn't stop yawning. It would soon be daybreak, and neither he nor his father, missionary Henry Williams, had had a wink of sleep. They were working on the most important document ever in the history of Aotearoa, New Zealand. It all started late in the afternoon the day before, 4th of February, 1840. A messenger came from the Lieutenant Governor, Captain William Hobson, bringing the English version of what we now call the Treaty of Waitangi. Hobson, his secretary James Freeman, and British resident James Busby had been preparing the document for 4 days. It contained an introduction, called the Preamble, and 4 sections, articles, and a total of almost 600 words. At last it was complete, but they needed a version in Māori, and who better to ask than Henry Williams and his 22-year-old son, Edward. Both were fluent speakers of Te Reo Māori. They were the men for the job. Night fell in the coastal settlement of Paihia, where they lived. Seabirds were silent, and a ruru called in the bush nearby. Little waves rolled up the sand, paused, sighed, then ran out again. The day had been hot and the cool of night was welcome. Everyone else, including Henry's wife Marianne and their other children, ate their evening meal and went to bed. Henry and Edward sat on opposite sides of the wooden table in Henry's study. They each had a wooden pen with a steel nib that they dipped in ink. Candlelight flickered and cast long shadows on the walls. They worked slowly and carefully, and often stopped to discuss the best words to use. Even so, the dialect they used was missionary Māori, and some critical words were not quite the same meaning as the English text. One of the most important was sovereignty, which they translated as kāwanatanga. But the two words do not mean quite the same thing. When the Māori rangatira listened to Henry's explanation the next day, and when they later signed the treaty, the rangatira did not understand that they were losing their sovereignty, their right to manage their own affairs. It was a long night. The first tui was whistling, and the candle had burned to a stub when Henry placed the final dot on the page. They laid down their pens. Henry pinched the candle out. "There," he said, satisfied. "Thank the Lord, Edward. A job well done." There was no reply. "Edward?" Henry said, looking up. Edward's head was resting on the table, and his eyes were closed. He was fast asleep.
Oh,
How did that sound, Toby? It sounded like she captured the whole panel.
that's fantastic. That's amazing. It's really, really cool to see something expanded out like that. That's great. I love it.
It was so much fun, and I had to.
Different stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, had to put a bit of imagination in there. So there was a few things which had a bit of license applied. But
Yeah, I think that's a really good. Yeah, fascinating. That's so well done. That's cool to hear that.
Well done.
Thank you, Jana. So now we're going to cut to a video of Toby illustrating a story from 3 Kiwi Tales.
wonderful. Thank you, Toby. What a wonderful picture. It looks really good. I loved seeing how it developed too. So that was just all part of the thing of seeing how she got mended as well. Very nice.
Okay, cool.
So, one of our last questions was, what's one thing you'd like kids that read your books to take away from your book?
Number one.
Yeah, so we'll start with Janet. On the spot.
What a wonderful, amazing, unique creature a Kiwi is, and how we have to just keep looking after them and the places they live. How many things was that?
What about you, Toby?
I think it's just that it's how important our history is to know about, and to not be sort of shy or scared about looking back about some of that stuff, and being kind of honest with ourselves about what's actually happened. Because the more we know about what's actually happened, the more it makes the present day make sense, I think.
So thank you, Toby, and thank you, Janet, for taking time to talk to us about your books, 3 Kiwi Tales and the Treaty of Waitangi. We hope you had a lot of fun doing the challenge, writing your stories and drawing your the illustration from the books. And we would also just like to thank LIANZA and the New Zealand Book Awards for Children and Young Adults for everything they do.
Good luck.
Good luck. Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much.
It's been wonderful. It was a bit daunting to start with, and it's turned out to be just an amazing experience. So thank you.
Oh, awesome. Okay, if you're ever in Nelson, pop on in.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, that's good.